Our talk today, ecosystem impacts of road salt use. So as Sarah mentioned, I work with Wisconsin Saltwise, which is a coalition of organizations across the state. It started in the Madison area back around 2014, 2015. And then when I was hired, the prerogative was really kind of growing this out statewide, connecting with others around the state who are already involved in salt reduction activities and catalyzing more movement around this issue. So a little bit about me, as I mentioned before, I grew up in northwestern Wisconsin. So up north by the northwestern Wisconsin, the Chippewa River, if you see that on the map. My family had a cabin up by there between the Flamingo and the Chippewa Rivers. If you go even farther north, there's a photo when I was a kid with my brother out, fishing, loved to swim, canoe, paddle, always felt a connection to our freshwater and found that to be really restorative for me. And I would remind everybody, if you take a look at this map that I have of all these rivers, like you probably have some connections with some of these places as well. And we're a state, that's really, really rich in our freshwater resources. We're named after the Wisconsin River that flows down from far north central Wisconsin all the way through the state out to the Mississippi. So these are some resources that, of course, we don't want to be taking for granted. And as much as, we love water, I love water, water also really loves water and loves salt. So bear with me, I'm used to giving this in person. But if you look to the right, you see two H's and an O. I think everyone understands that's the water molecule, H2O. And those molecules really, really love to be close to one another. Different charges and polarities. I'm not going to bring on my full chemistry teacher nerdiness to this. But you want to understand water loves water. Those molecules like to be by one another. But they also really, really love salt. So sodium chloride, NaCl, you see those green and yellow spheres kind of in the middle. When salt goes into water, those atoms break apart into ions, charged particles, and the sodium and the chloride, they're broken apart now, and they get these giant bear hugs from water molecules. And the water, from that point forward, does not let go of the salt. So one giant idea, if you take nothing else out of our presentation today, is this idea that once salt goes into water, it's there to stay. We say salt is a permanent pollutant in our water. The only way to remove that is through, it takes a lot of energy to do that. Let's just say that. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of greenhouse gases. That's why my aunt who lives in LA deals with severe water shortages. They're on an ocean, but desalinizing water is not something that is easy to do. And so the best thing we can do is keep our fresh water fresh. So I'm gonna, like I said, really dive into the ecosystem impacts and impacts to our water, but I do wanna mention a few other costs of the use of salt. So we can see over the last 20 years, the price of salt has close to tripled. Some parts of the state are actually, paying over $90 a ton right now, but this is a year-old data, and this was the average paid statewide by the DOT, and that's what they kind of sell to, have counties use and sell to municipalities. So the cost of salt is going up, which is driving, it's a good thing, it's driving changes to salt practices. We also see other impacts to oversalting, damage to vegetation. Now these are nationwide figures, so $2 billion a year. Salt prematurely ages our infrastructure, roads and bridges, to the tune of over $5 billion a year. And this is data I can share if anyone wants, like the white papers later on. This was several years ago, so I'm sure that with inflation, this number might even be doubled what it was there. It does a lot of damage to our personal vehicles. This is a figure from AAA. So all in all, for about every dollar we spend on salt, we need to recognize we're doing about $10 of damage that we end up paying on the back end. And I also want to just share some photos. Like once you start to pay attention to that, it's something you really can't unsee. So these are all pictures that I took in the last year as I walk around in the winter. You can see the salt there, the damage to that metal in the spring and the summer when you see that grass is not coming back on the sides of sidewalks where excess salt was applied. and then our concrete, you know, kind of breaking apart, doing damage to door jambs, floors, etc. So I want to take a step back though. When we were talking about salt, people have a lot of different ideas and understandings. So I want to give people a second. When you think about salt, what's something that is beneficial about salt? How might it be good for us or the environment? What's something that's bad that you know of or harmful about salt? And then do you have any random salt facts? So I want you to put yourself for a minute in the place of maybe a 5-year-old, a kindergartner. Like, what would they think about salt? Good, bad, or random? Maybe a cook or a chef, maybe a doctor. What is their understanding of salt? Or just a random person kind of strolling down the street or the sidewalk. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I want you to put into the chat either good colon, bad colon, random colon, and then your fact. What's something you know about salt? Good, bad, or random, or that others might know about salt. So take a moment here in the chat. Again, if you just joined, this is the top right icon. It looks like a little talk bubble. So I invite you to click that and then type into the chat maybe the word good, and then a fact about salt that I'm just going to say a 5-year-old might know. Something about salt that they're going to say is good. So there we got Patty V. Thanks for kicking us off here. So Patty said, good, salt is a preservative, right? It helps food last longer. Bad, it increases our blood pressure. Susan was also thinking along those same lines of salt is a preservative for our food. Also, Sue Ellen said good, makes our food taste better, right? We need some salt, right? There's a reason why we like the taste of salt. We need salt to live in moderation. Also noting there, in addition to kind of blood pressure, your heart, that high blood pressure idea, like maybe your lawn doesn't need to be salted, right? And we just saw that dead grass along the strip of sidewalk there. So yeah, electrolytes, right? Like the sodium, those chloride ions, they are important in our bodies in moderation. Let's see if we can have another person or two. I think we got some guys in the room maybe. I see a lot of, it looks like female names. It's just a challenge to the men out there. Can somebody put in a good, bad, or random fact? And then we'll move forward. Janet. Awesome. Yeah, salt was traded. So for like millennia, right? Like salt was a very, very rare and precious resource. And now we have very large amounts of it that we bring into the state. So the state of Wisconsin is not an area that naturally had salt. And all the salt that we bring into the state is leaving in our water. It's all making its way into our water, making water salty. So with that, if others want to type things in later, Lee might be our man here who was brave enough to put something in the chat, helps keep ice off roads. All right, so that's a good thing, right? It's a de-icer and it keeps our roadways safer in the winter. Very important. All right, so I'm going to pop back then into my presentation. Let's see if I can do that a little more quickly this time. Thank you everybody who joined in the chat. Maybe you're chatting outside of the chat, but with someone you're watching this with. So thank you for that. All right, so let's jump in. We're going to talk about first salt's impact on very simple systems. So I got my grouchy pickle here because I'm going to discuss this as being the pickle effect. So with Sue Ellen, Patty, maybe others mentioned salt is a preservative, right? I love to eat pickles. My brother can eat a whole jar of pickles in one sitting. But we got our little joke here, if you take that for a moment, about the pickle. A little salty, a little grouchy. So what's going on with this pickle? I move the mouse around a little bit, but so the pickle is kind of like this left side, the blue side of the diagram. Semi-permeable membrane where there's a lot of water. So again, these little blue bubbles here are the water molecules, the two little H's and the O's, that Mickey Mouse ears. So there's a lot of water inside our cucumber. And then to the right is that brine solution that we put the cucumber in, which has some water in it, but it also has a lot of salt. So what happens when we put something in a solution with a lot of salt is that if possible, that water is going to move through, kind of dehydrate and move into the solution where all that salt is and try to regain a balance. So your pickle concept that you want to hold on to is that when we put things in a salty solution, the cells lose water. We are losing water. They're shrinking. So I'm going to show you that one more time, since I can't move around and kind of do this with my hands and see people's faces and make sure you understand. I'm going to try this one more time. So the top right, again, is that little diagram with the blue waters and the sodium chloride. Now we could argue did not properly show us that sodium and chloride split apart, so water can give it those hugs. But anyway, so we've got sodium chloride, salt in and outside of the cell. Cell is in balance. Cell's feeling good, that little smiley dude in the bottom. But now we add more salt. So we put a lot of salt around that cell. What's going to happen? We remember the pickle effect, right? That water is going to move out of the cell. The salt is drawing that water out, and our cell is going to shrink. He looks a little less happy right now. And this is why. I know we said that it's really good, right, to preserve food. It's good for us as humans, right, that the food lasts longer. But I want you to flip that idea on its head for a moment. Why is the food lasting longer? Normally, that food would start to get moldy, right? There'd be bacteria growing in there so that when we eat it, we would get sick. So that's good for us that that's not happening, but that's bad for the mold and the bacteria, right? All of that salt is killing those simple organisms that cannot tolerate all of the salt we've put there. So one more time to kind of go over this concept. Right now we've got a cell, let's say like a little bacteria, something simple. We've put a lot of salt around it. And in this picture on the top left, you see those red arrows because the cell is shrinking. It's turning into a little pickle. A lot of water has left. And when that pickle effect happens, we see a stop sign because the cellular functions are stopping. The liquid or the cytoplasm inside that cell has turned maybe into jello, and stuff can't move around and work the way that it's supposed to when you've got that jello inside the cell, when the cell's half pickled. So what does the cell do? The cell actually can adapt, and it tries to bring salt in. By bringing salt in, some more water will flow back into the cell and things can start happening again. The cell can start doing what it needs to do. But it's brought that extra salt in, and that salt, especially that chloride, can be toxic to the cell. So we are not in full-on stop mode, but we're now in slow down mode, and the cell is not functioning the way that it is supposed to. So that is the pickle effect. What does that mean in our ecosystems? Well, tiny little organisms that like zooplankton here are kind of like little pickles. And when we put them in water, or when the water that they are in grows increasingly salty, we see this happen to them, and it stresses their bodies out, and they do not survive at the same rates. If you have less zooplankton or fewer zooplankton in a particular body of water, what does that mean? Who cares? Those are tiny little things, right? They look like little snails or something, right? It doesn't matter. No one's worrying about finding those in the water, are they? Well, maybe you or I aren't, but the fish that eat them really do like when they're around. So if those populations go down, it means there's less food moving up the food chain. Less giant champion fish here, prize fish for our angler. Also, we look at this going down the food chain. If there aren't as many zooplankton around, it means there are fewer grazers to eat the algae. What does that mean? It contributes to our waters getting greener and murkier. This is research coming out of the University of Toledo with the researcher Bill Hintz. And I'll come back to Bill's work in a moment. But I want us to jump on to another way that salt has an impact on systems that are a little bit more complex, kind of like so remember, number one, our simple systems, we want to have the pickle effect. And number two, we're trying to think about stress. What does that mean? So this is my kind of basic diagram here. I grabbed, for educational purposes here, a little diagram of blood. This was be a blood vessel in the center. And then on the top and the bottom, I have cells. Now I just have little blue circles here that are supposed to represent our water. So we have water in the cells, we have water in our blood, right? It's the liquid, very watery. And then in the blood, all of a sudden, boom, I am adding salt. So there are just more things there in the water. I want you to think of those as salt. So what does this mean? Maybe someone ate some pickles or some potato chips or something salty for dinner, and salt made its way into your bloodstream right now. You got more salt in your blood. What's going to happen? Well, if we go back to the pickle effect, we remember if things are surrounded by a lot of salt, water is drawn out of those cucumbers, right? Or drawn out of our cells, and it moves into the blood. Whoa, what just happened to our blood? We had a certain amount of water, and now that water the volume increased. So I want you to imagine your arteries right now, or those blood vessels, with more water. All of a sudden, boom, the amount of water goes up in them. What is going to happen to your blood pressure? Boom, it went up. So you just increased your blood pressure after eating that salt. So that's okay, right? That's what your kidneys are for. Your kidneys work on taking extra water out of your blood. They also clean the salt out. But if we're doing that over and over and over to our bodies, the kidneys get kind of stressed out. It takes its toll. Also, when we're always increasing our blood pressure with that salt, our arterial walls start to kind of adapt. And they say, hey, I don't want this happening to me over and over again. What am I going to do? I'm going to grow a thicker wall here so I can kind of tolerate that a little bit more, which actually ends up meaning that we shrink sometimes the size of that pipe, and that further elevates our blood pressure and can reduce blood flow to all the organs. So I think Sue Ellen maybe had mentioned, it's not just your blood pressure, it's also your heart. We think about our brains, our lungs, all body kind of organs become impacted by long-term high blood pressure. So our fish and aquatic ecosystems have slightly more, complex systems. They're not like these little zooplankton little pickles, but they experience salt as a stressor, just like we do when there's too much of it. These guys aren't choosing to eat potato chips, right? But the water that they swim in is growing increasingly salty. So again, this is research coming out of the lab of Bill Hintz in the University of Toledo. And here we have trout, fingerling trout, grown in high road salt, no road salt environments. And these are high road salt environments on par with what we're seeing in some of the streams in the Milwaukee area. And we see reduced rates of reproduction, reduced rates of growth apparent in this side, higher susceptibility to parasites. So this impacts fish, our salamanders, our frogs, right? And it's especially noticed in the young because they do not have the same ability to osmoregulate and kind of pull those salts out of their bloodstream. So where are we right now? I've mentioned a few times now the Milwaukee area is especially bad, right? The most urbanized part of the state, the highest concentration of roads, highest road density, highest amount of salts going down. So naturally in Wisconsin, we would have pretty much zero chloride in our water, fresh water. There are a few parts of the state where you have some natural brines in the bedrock, so maybe 0 to 10. But we can see that that's not what we're seeing through much of the state right now. Chloride concentrations in our lakes and rivers have gone into the 10s, even the hundreds and thousands of milligrams per liter. And this is a map that was put together by Linnea Rock, a grad student formerly from the Hillary Dugan lab at UW-Madison. In the Madison area, because we've got a big research institution there, there's been a lot of data collected. Also, this actually was collected by Madison-Dane County Public Health, who was tasked with this job since the 1960s when the city began putting salt down on roads. They said, maybe we should keep an eye on how much salt is showing up in our lakes. And those concentrations, again, naturally about zero, only going up and up and up. If you're in the Madison area, you have an idea that, Lake Mendota is the biggest lake, right? So it has the greatest ability to dilute that water that's coming in. And the smaller the lake, going down to Lake Wingra, least ability to dilute that. We see more variability and higher concentrations. So Lake Wingra is one of 4 water bodies right now in Dane County that's known to be impaired, where we're seeing chloride concentrations up to the point where it's impacting the aquatic life. So zipping back again to southeastern Wisconsin, this is data gathered by SewerPAC. So that stands for Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. They are right now analyzing just over 2 years of data that they collected. And I was able to get this grab sample data from them. So these are people going out and getting a quick sample of water, sending it to the lab for testing. And what we see here on this graph, chloride concentrations in milligrams per liter, again, naturally pretty much zero. The orange dashed line is where the DNR right now has set our chronic toxicity limit, meaning if organisms are exposed to salt water that is that salty over time are going to have negative impacts. And then the red dashed line is the acute toxicity limit, meaning if organisms that have evolved to live in freshwater are exposed to water that is that salty, they, even just in a short period of time, are going to have negative health impacts. Now, that said, these lines both need to be lowered because we are definitely seeing a lot of research right now showing impacts to our freshwater species at much, much lower values than what we have on this graph. And I'm happy to share more information about that. Research coming out of Michigan, Ohio, Canada. It's just that these numbers have been set for many years, just our lab-based data, not looking at what we're actually seeing in streams. But what do we see in this? We're seeing definitely values way above that acute toxicity limit, even as it stands, spiking way up on days when we have snow melt events, right? And all that salt that's been put down in the winter is just rapidly being flushed into our streams. Another thing I would draw your attention to is even in the summer months, we're not going back down to 0 milligrams per liter anymore. So what's going on? Well, we've put so much salt down for decades that salt concentrations have built up in our soils and also in our groundwater. So even in the summer months, we're recharging with salted water. We see that in, again, going back to Madison example, the chloride concentrations in the municipal wells there only increasing, the average increasing, and then this top whisker getting to the point where people who are on, supposed to be on a low sodium diet, it's kind of above what they are recommended to drink in a day, and to the point where some people who are more sensitive to taste are saying they can taste the salt in the water. So I'm going to jump into now a couple more ecosystem level impacts. We've talked about kind of what is happening to individual organisms and kind of how that impacts food webs, but there are also some concerns at the ecosystem level. So one is that as our lakes get really salty, salt water is more dense than fresh water, so the salt tends to build up in a dense kind of cold layer at the bottom of the lake. And if that gets to be too dense, too salty, it can actually prevent natural lake turnover from occurring. And we're seeing that in some lakes in upstate New York, like the article I have here, also in Minnesota. Thankfully, I'm not aware of any right now in Wisconsin, but there's definitely a lot of research being done in this area or around this issue right now. So want to get more information right now about what's happening in water bodies across Wisconsin. Another big component to this issue is that of chemical cocktails. So this is a term coined by Sujay Kashal at the University of Maryland, actively researching this right now, because what scientists are seeing is that as salt concentrations go up in our water, we're seeing increased levels of other ions in our water as well. So what's happening here, it's kind of like a water softener in reverse. So in our soils, the clay particles have negative charges. They hold on to things with positive charges. Opposites attract, right? So in my little diagram, I used to be a chemistry teacher, so bear with me. I have K plus, which is potassium. I just made like a little copper ion. Any sort of metals like iron, radionuclides can be held by those clay particles in the soil. They can also be held by rocks, or our pipes might be made of some of these positively charged metal ions. So as stormwater with extra sodium and chloride moves through the soil, what happens is the sodium with those positive charges binds to the clay particles, and it can cause the release of other ions that were there. And then chloride moves through because negative is not attracted to negative. And so we have more chloride showing up in our drinking water as well as those other ions. So the higher concentrations, elevated concentrations of sodium and chloride in the Flint River actually contributed to the lead crisis there. They caused the release of more lead from lead pipes. So we're seeing this, in drinking water across the US, and actually Sujay calls it freshwater salinization syndrome, an emerging global issue. So we really are seeing this across the globe where we've been adding salts for decades now. So not all great news. I don't know how well everyone was kind of versed in the subject beforehand, but I want to leave you with some hope here because there really is a lot that we can do and a lot that's already being done. So one thing is making sure that everybody who's involved in this issue works to get more education. So thank you for joining in the webinar today. Saltwise does a lot of work with winter maintenance operators, supervisors, contractors. You see here, this was an in-person class last year. We got some masks, a library up in DeForest. We also have webinars that are available online for viewing. All of the classes that we offer are free. There are additional classes through APWA, American Public Works Association, through SIMA, the Snow and Ice Management Association. So just getting people educated on the issue and best practices is huge. It really does go a long way, as I'll show you in a moment. So these are some of our classes you can see on the website. These are a couple old ones, but we've got a bunch this fall through October, November, December. So if you have connections with anybody involved in winter maintenance professionally, or you live maybe at a condo where they hire out a contractor, if you can work to get people from that agency or organization, business, whatever, to get to in these classes, that would be amazing. I mentioned already, different webinars. So bringing in people who've done a lot of work around salt reduction, sharing their stories. All of our webinars are archived on YouTube, so you can check those out anytime. Share those links. We also coordinate equipment open houses where professionals can share what they've learned and the successes they've had and the hurdles they've run into and how they've gotten over them with others, so that we aren't all reinventing the wheel here and we can just move further, faster together towards better practices. Saltwise also works with municipalities on communicating what they're doing and why, so that people understand that we're not just going to put down huge amounts of salt anymore, right? Like we need to do things a better way, and making sure that people understand, we're not going to have July road conditions in December. It's winter in Wisconsin. We're going to do a lot. We're going to do what we can, but leaving early, leaving space, and not crowding plows, parking, where you are supposed to. All of these things really do make a difference and help us keep everybody safe. So we're working to get that out through PSAs, videos, handouts, etc. So I want to dive just a little bit into some of the best practices. I'm assuming most people in this room are not winter maintenance professionals, so I'm not going to dive too deep, but give you a little bit of a rundown on some of the best practices, from covering salt, calibrating, varying rates, liquids, etc. So liquids, use and calibration is huge, really can and has enabled reductions up and over 50%. I am not kidding you. We have some municipalities and counties in the state that have actually reduced salt use by up to 70%. So huge, huge opportunity here. If we can educate people and get them to work on using liquids, calibrating equipment to really protect our waters and our infrastructure. So just a quick moment on liquids, and I've got actually a couple of pictures here also of some homemade brine makers that are from, to the left, UW Whitewater's campus, UW Eau Claire campus. So these don't have to be super fancy, but it's adding salt in with water. So making salt water, salt brine, it's still salt, but it's, you know, kind of diluted down. It can be spread over a greater distance, so we can drastically reduce total salt use. And when it's wet, salt acts faster. When it's already in solution, it can work immediately. It's activated. Many of you have probably seen those lines down the road, those brine lines, and it works like greasing your skillet. If you put a little bit of oil on your skillet, it doesn't take much, right? And your spatula can come and the food goes right off your cooking implement there. So if we can do that, we save so much on the back end. I know probably everybody here has sometimes forgotten to oil a skillet, and you put your egg or whatever you're cooking on there, and afterwards, what are you doing? You're scraping and you're scraping, and you're using way more manpower, human power, and potentially salt or soap, you know, afterwards to break that bond. So brine really does go a long way to support salt reduction. We also want to really be good at our mechanical removal, because again, we're trying to move snow, right? Salt is really just used to break the bond between the snow and the pavement so you can move the snow. We don't want to burn through all of the snow. That would be insane amounts of salt. So using, you know, good shovel blades, good plow blades, there's sectional plow blades, can get really deep into this. I just have a picture here of a brush tool, rotary brush, on the front of like a little tractor. They got these skid steers, and sometimes you can get really down close to pavement and you don't even need to salt afterwards. Couple other, you know, kind of best practices to think about. What are we encouraging people to do? If all you have by the steps or the entryway is a bucket of salt, that's the only tool that people have, that's the tool they're going to use, right? What if we had a broom or a shovel? We told people, you know, if you need salt, it's out at the back entrance. So just trying to encourage that mechanical removal first. If I thought I had this on here, maybe it's a little later on. If we do have salt, we want to make sure people know how much is needed. So a 12-ounce coffee cup is actually enough for 10 sidewalk squares. So if you have some salt out, mark on the scoop how much is needed to de-ice the steps, for instance. Also evaluating those expectations for level of service, making sure we have signage up. If we're not going to salt an area, let people know, be careful, be cautious. Walkways might be icy. We're closing these steps because maintaining them doesn't make sense. It take way too much salt. Use a different entrance, maybe to a building. Like this picture that's on our Facebook. It says salt smart, save more. It says only takes 1 teaspoon of salt to 5 gallons of water. So reminding people kind of part of why we're doing this. Covering salt, super important to make sure the salt can be used and reduce that salt runoff. I think this person didn't mean well. At some point it was tarped, I'm assuming, because that's what the tire was there to hold the tarp down, but that didn't last. And now we've got salt moving into the waterway downhill from this parking lot. Not great, right? So when we see that stuff, making sure we're reporting that so public health can actually take action and have these areas cleaned up and dealt with. Sometimes maybe people mean well, but are way over applying. This is way too much salt. This is insane. This is actually more than a day after the storm. I took this photo outside a business sidewalk, and this is way more salt than would need to be put down, even if there was some moisture, some snow there. But this is all that's left over after the salt had done some melting. So we really need to make sure equipment is calibrated and we're just putting down the amount of salt that's needed. This is an example from Cudahy in the south part of Milwaukee, showing the savings that they found after calibrating their trucks. So this was a picture of a truck that was supposed to be putting down 300 pounds per lane mile. And when they calibrated it, they found out it was actually putting down 850 pounds per lane mile. So they got to dial that way back, so that when they said 300, it was actually putting down 300. And they were able to keep those savings, salt savings, in-house and reinvest them in equipment. And it enabled them to further improve their fleet. And they made it to just under 70% reduction in salt use. Pretty amazing. So we have resources for calibrating trucks, calibrating drop spreaders. We have classes and work with people to make that information available. Oh, here is the picture I thought I had up there. Kind of the idea of calibrating at a smaller scale, letting people know. Library West, 1 scoop or less, that's all you need. Don't throw 6 scoops of salt down. And then I wanted to plant a little bit of a seed for things it would be incredible to see more of, work to close the loop. So all the salt from cheese brine, pickling, making soy sauce, kikkoman, for example, all the salt that goes out of our water softener, all of that salt also ends up in our streams, because wastewater treatment plants, again, cannot pull salt out of water. That water loves salt ions. Once it's there, it'd be like running reverse osmosis, all of our wastewater. And so we are not doing that. We can't really afford to do that. So what we can do is try to capture that waste brine and clean it, and use that in other ways, like on our roads. So Colorado DOT is running a study this year to use waste cheese brine, byproduct from a creamery, and put that on their roads. We've had a few pilots of that in Wisconsin. Some of them have gone really well, but then I think there's some misunderstandings about what that means, to use this waste product. But I think people don't realize if we're not using it on our roads, it's still making its way into our water, and we can cut the amount of salt, total amount of salt coming in, if we can find ways to use these waste products. So Saltwise really tries to get the word out around this issue. We've got little videos, social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you're on any of those, I would highly recommend or ask you to follow us and like us. Easy ways to share the word. We also get out to in-person events when we can, especially in the summer, doing some printing on shirts so people can be Saltwise advocates. These are some of the prints made with wood blocks and a local artist in the Madison area created for us. So what can you do to be a Saltwise advocate? Again, I mentioned if you have any connections with people involved with winter maintenance, maybe through where you live or where you work, where your kids go to school, if you can encourage people who are involved in this firsthand to take some basic trainings. We have free half-day classes, we have webinars available, calibration resources available, tons of information out there. Help support our work to get this word out to the public. In January of every year, we have Wisconsin Salt Awareness Week. I guess this will be our 3rd year of that. We work with a lot of partners across the state to promote this, but we always need more support. So using different hashtags that are out there, and yeah, just thinking about other ways. Maybe this planted a seed and you've got another idea about something that could be done in your community. So just let me know if there are ways, ideas that you have about collaboration to get the message out beyond just social media, additional audiences to present to. And then things that I would like to see kind of happening more would be getting signs out at point of service. So or point of sale, where people are buying road salt, buying water softener salt. What if we had a little sign that had to be there because of maybe it was a city ordinance that says, if you're selling salt, you need to let people know that all this salt goes into our water. Every teaspoon of salt pollutes 5 gallons of water. So thinking about ways to get the message out and kind of build energy around this issue. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and go back here. And I would welcome any questions. And also if you want to, when you ask those questions, if you don't mind kind of putting your video on so I can see people, that would be great.
I see Sue Ellen asked in the chat if there were links for what homeowners can do, if you have any on your site.
Yeah, let me try to pull that up here. We like to tell homeowners shovel, scatter, switch. And then I have someone said sweep in there. So sorry, too many screens to go. So put that on there. So shovel, scatter, switch. So first shovel, get as much snow up as you can without salt, right? Good shovels, good kind of brushes maybe, brooms. And then shovel, scatter. If you do need to use salt, make sure you know kind of how much is needed. Remember that, so that coffee mug, 12 ounces for 10 sidewalk squares. Switch, if it's below 15 degrees, salt isn't really effective at melting ice. And so then we want to switch to another material. Maybe that's sand to just kind of get some traction and wait till temperatures warm up. And then you can work on using a de-icer. And then sweep. If you have over applied and you see extra salt left over and all the moisture is gone, you can sweep up dry salt and use it again. Otherwise, it's just making its way into our water. So I did put a link in there. Yeah, I'd encourage everybody to kind of check out our website for other resources. But Jill, do you have a question? Or
Jill, your mic is off.
You're muted, but maybe you're just being friendly and coming on. I appreciate that too.
Being friendly, yes, but on the other, I also wanted to ask if there is another alternative to salt. You mentioned sand, kitty litter. What are some of the better things that one could use?
Yeah, so I definitely heard of people using kitty litter, bird seed for some traction. Maybe on your sidewalks. I don't know that I would throw that out. You know, we're not going to be throwing that out on the roads, but also if people have fires and you have some ash, you can put that down on sidewalks. And again, if it's dark, you know, it's going to absorb more heat and kind of help with the melting. And that way, in addition to providing traction. Now, there's no material that has zero impact, right? Like anything we put down on the land makes its way into our water. But you know, the chloride, the sodium and the chloride just dissolve. So they can run into, you know, and through our soils. Sand, like I feel like on a sidewalk or like my steps, it's gonna make its way into the lawn and pretty much stay there. You know, we don't, as a municipality, you can't really just like put tons of sand down because that's going to make its way into the storm sewers and clog up storm sewers and you know, destroy habitat and streams. There are some chloride free de-icers that are out there. One project is called Entry. Pretty expensive though, but like if you were in an area where you really wanted to protect your interior and not have that corrosion occur, products like that are good. I mean, that's what I get. Airports, they use chloride-free de-icers because they can't have our planes corroding, right? But it's a yeah.
So somebody just mentioned beet juice as a pre-treatment on roads. What about that?
Yeah, so beet juice are things that have sugars in them. They do work to depress the melting point. If you think about it, like if you put straight water in the freezer and you put water and sugar in the freezer, so when you're making an ice cube or you're making a popsicle, you can think about how, you know, hard those things are, right? How kind of much they freeze. So sugar prevents the formation of ice crystals, and so it can lower the freezing point. That said, sugars are, I mean, and they're also sticky, so they help if we put like a brine down, they help it stick in place. People aren't going to use straight beet juice, but beet juices, especially there's a proprietary product called Beet Heat. Some municipalities and counties buy it, has some beet juice in it, but it's also really clean, it's purified, so it's not as sludgy. That's been an issue in kind of gumming up pumps and hoses and stuff. So I've heard of more people buying like Beet Heat or other proprietary products that have some sugar in them, and then they will also have other chlorides. So magnesium chloride, calcium chloride, can further lower the melting point. So when we want to get down below 15, remember I said that's when we want to switch and not use straight salt. Municipalities and counties will then start adding in magnesium chloride and calcium chloride so that they can have those lower melting, have melting at lower temperatures, and adding those sugars additional, like provide some additional benefit also. But just straight beet juice is kind of tricky. I haven't heard of anybody really having success with that.
Do you find that municipalities are open to these conversations about smarter salt management, or?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, like I said, it's the dollars, right? As they're feeling the pinch, right? Salt almost tripling in price. Like they can't keep over applying, right? And municipalities, they're paying for the salt. They're seeing that, directly in their budgets. We definitely need to work on getting the message out more to private contractors. A lot of times they can be incentivized to put more salt down because they get paid by the amount of salt they've applied. So, and the additional thing there is, even if you have contractors that are kind of on board with this, if the property managers are calling them up and saying, we need to see more salt here. I don't see salt on the ground, right? I need to see the salt. Like, no, you don't. If you see salt, it means too much salt is down. You don't want to see salt. But there's just so much fear around liability. So we do have a draft bill right now that we're hoping to get introduced in January when the legislature is back in session, that would provide some limited liability protection if contractors get certified and then document what they do, that they couldn't be sued if somebody slips and falls. Because yes, it's winter in Wisconsin, pavement is not going to be perfect. Like we can do our due diligence and get out there and remove stuff and put salt down, but like there's just risk involved with winter.
I got a question. Do you have any outreach materials, visuals that people can download to show family members and friends on how to properly distribute salt?
Yeah, so I'm going to go to our outreach tools page here. That's one of the things we've got. I would also recommend, so there are a bunch of links on that page.
Okay.
If you are involved in education at all, we have a lesson plan for elementary and middle school students, as well as one for high school students. So I will put those teacher resources in the chat as well. And then, let me think. There was one other thought I had, the smart winter salting. There's just a little 5-minute video that gives a good kind of overview of this problem. Although, let's see if I can put that down in there. And then really like anything on our YouTube, I would say there's a ton of resources if you have a minute to kind of take a look and grab a link to that and send it to someone that's interested.
And I'll add all of these links when I send out the recording of this webinar too, so everybody can have that readily available. Are there any other questions?
I have one more question, and
Yes, Ellen.
so I'm 72 almost, and worried about breaking my hip. And 3 of my friends actually did. So anyway, I always thought that the little salt granules kept me from slipping, but you're saying no, that's not true.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if we have bare pavement, if we've like removed, if there's no like snow or ice there, and then there's salt left over on top of like that bare pavement, kind of like that photo that I shared with you, then that's a slipping hazard itself. Like there actually was somebody who slipped on salt that was on the sidewalk. They slipped and they fell because it's like marbles, right? And there's actually a lawsuit right now in Wisconsin over that. So it's yeah, it gets tricky. And also we're not saying like don't take care of sidewalks. That's definitely not the salt. It's salt wise, right? Still salt. We can use salt, but like let's be smart about it and not over apply. And using brine. So sometimes that, like I mentioned, that's that pre-treatment beforehand. Also, brine can be used even during and after the storm, or can be mixed in with rock salt. So when it's applied, it's wet and it's like activated again, then it works faster and it sticks. It stays where we want it to. Brine has been shown to, I want to say decrease, brine gets us to better conditions faster. So
Okay.
it can help reduce salt use, but it also helps provide kind of like a higher even level of service. So it's really a win. There are, some additional costs by, trying to apply salt in this other way, in this liquid form, and making sure people have more knowledge and understanding about how to do that in the right way and when that's appropriate. So that's why, like I said, there's these training resources, but I really do think it's the direction we're going to move because it just makes sense. It saves money, and it provides a higher level of service. It's just, can we do that faster and protect our water?
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Sue Ellen.
Does anyone else have any questions? If you think of any,
Yeah, it's like making brine at home. Yeah, so again, I would say if possible, if you can avoid salt at home, if you can really get out there and, broom and sweep and kind of avoid the salt, that's ideal. If you do want to make brine at home, I know the city of Superior and Duluth, I think, through the regional twin ports, have put up some recipes for making brine. So we can try to see and find you that resource. Brine is 23% salt to water, so you can make your own brine at home. If you're really an engineer and you want to grab waste water softener brine, that's pretty cool. But yeah, you can make brine and then use that. I've heard of people, I haven't seen it, people take like a little backpack, like a herbicide, like pesticide sprayer to apply it, if they're just doing it kind of like at home. But yeah.
okay. Well, if anybody thinks of questions afterwards, please feel free to email us. It's info@wglbbo.org. I'll put that in the chat really quickly. But otherwise, thank you for coming, and thank you, Allison. This was extremely informational, and I think it's valuable for everybody to know, especially as we come into the ice season in Wisconsin.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody. Reach out if you have any questions, comments, ideas. Yeah, happy to chat some more.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.